Okay.
Paleo-Indians, and maybe
Okay.
say...
Suppose I start with why sea level was rising.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the glaciers were melting worldwide and the water was going back to the ocean basins. Okay.
And then if you could give it a starting point, say, so therefore at, and then give me like some sort of year. Or,
okay, but if you're going to pin me down as to how far sea level was down, I can do it for the maximum lowering. Right. If you ask me where it was 10,000 years ago, I'm going to go look at my sea level curve. Right. Okay. And then I can tell you.
Say within the next several thousand years, or just try to try to give us little clues.
Okay.
Go ahead whenever you're ready.
All right.
So, why were the glaciers? Why was sea level rising?
Okay, sea level was rising from about 18,000 years ago, because that was the time when the continental glaciers throughout the world started to retreat. And the water that was trapped in the ice of the continental glaciers was originally taken from the ocean basins, and sea level fell as the glaciers grew. Now, as the glaciers waned and got smaller, that water returns to the ocean basins and sea level begins to rise. And about 18,000 years ago, we had the maximum low stand, which would have been about 300 feet below present day sea level.
And at that point, Cape Cod was what, covered by a glacier?
At that point, at 18,000 years ago, Cape Cod was probably brand new. All right. What it looked like, if you subtracted Provincetown, Monomoy Point, Sandy Neck, and then added a little more land around the fringes, that's what it would look like. Okay. And as sea level rose, and the interesting thing is if you think about Cape Cod had a maritime environment from the very moment the glaciers left, because to the east of Cape Cod is a very deep basin called the Gulf of Maine. And the water in the Gulf of Maine immediately replaced the ice as the ice moved out. So if you were on Cape Cod 18,000 years ago, you only had perhaps a few tens of miles to get to the shore, perhaps less. And if you were among the earliest settlers, Indian settlers on Cape Cod, the shoreline for the lower Cape would not have been very far away. And about 8,000 years ago, it was a few miles to the east and about 12 miles away in Cape Cod Bay. So the Indians always had a marine environment to take advantage of, with fish and shellfish and waterfowl and all of the things that come with it.
And when did it start to change? Was there a period when there would have been a real change taking place in the landscape of the...
Well, I think the major erosion, marine erosion of the Cape probably started on the order of 4,000 to 6,000 years ago, and has been going on since then. The oldest ages that we have on the formation of the salt marshes, for example, are on the order of 4,000 years ago in the Barnstable Marshes. And in order for the Barnstable Marshes to form, you had to have an incipient sandy neck. So about 4,000 years ago, these things began to show up. There may have been earlier spits, but they were way offshore where we may be able to recognize them, but we're not, we haven't done enough work to do that.
One more thing about the time when sea level was really low. What kinds of things are now covered by water that wouldn't have been then?
Exactly what you see in the landscape today. Think of Stillwagon Bank, all right, which is north of Provincetown. It looks very much like the lower Cape. And it probably had a geography very much like what the lower Cape has today. But that now has been totally submerged to sea level, continue to rise. Now you got a good fishing grounds. But 10,000 years ago, it was dry land, and it was very much like living on Cape Cod if there was anybody living there. Yeah.
What about the PaleoIndians period? What was they?
Well, the thing about the Paleo-Indians is they arrived on the East Coast at a very dramatic time. Sea level was coming up very fast. Okay, they they could probably, if they were smart enough, and they probably were, they could recognize that they were in a very rapidly changing environment because sea level was coming up quickly. On the other hand, there's another whole phase here. If you go a little bit further to the north from the Cape, they were actually here when in that area sea level was dropping at a very extreme rate.
Why was it dropping?
This gets complicated because that area was more depressed by the weight of the ice than this area, and therefore it was depressed below the sea level, but it was coming up very quickly because the weight had been lifted off the crust, and therefore the Indians had a shoreline that was retreating seaward at a phenomenal rate. And on a very flat shore, let's say a tidal flat, they could almost, well, certainly they could yearly see the change. And it was a very dynamic time.
And what about as time went on and we got into the archaic periods and things? How gradual a shift was it?
Well, throughout that whole period, 10,000 years ago, Paleo-Indian time, and the archaic period that brings us down around 4,000, the rate of sea level rise was slowing down, but it was still much more than it is. Well, I got to backtrack here. It was, as far as the geologic record shows, it was much more than the present day rise in sea level. And about 4,000 years ago, sea level had risen to the point where the Cape was beginning to look like Cape Cod. And you would have recognized it. If you flew over it, you know that there was a peninsula here with you know, in the shape of a bended arm, and all of that would be visible to you. If you're a scientist, you have to say to yourself, we hope this isn't sustainable. We hope it will slow down, stop, and go back the other way. And so that it will be something that's doing this. We just happen to be on this part of that sea level rise curve.
Everything looks like
right, because we're in big trouble if sea level is rising 9 feet every time. You're not losing out because they're not there any longer. Okay, by and large, they were totally destroyed as the surf zone migrated across the surface. All right, and so you might go out there and find scattered arrowheads, but they would not be in contact, and you couldn't do anything with them. So there probably is very little reason to go out offshore and look for archaeological sites, except for shipwrecks and things like that. But Indian artifacts, I wouldn't bother.
But then again, that's probably, if you're looking for a record of, say, some of the oldest shorefront settlements, that's one of the reasons why.
Yeah, but they've been totally destroyed.
Right. But
all
I'm
right?
Just trying to.
I mean, you're not going to destroy the lithic fragments and the lithics. They're going to stay. All right. Obviously, they're going to survive, but they will be strewn and scattered and have very little meaning.
I guess what I'm getting at is that it would sea level rise be a reason why older settlements, older sites have not been found intact on Cape Cod because they have been inundated?
Well, not, if we've gotten back to 8,000, all right, you've got about 2 more thousand years, or maybe 11,000, to the point where we think the earliest man was here. So there's nothing beyond 11,000, let's say. There are people that don't necessarily agree with that, but probably if you look at the time it took the Asians to get to here to become the Paleo-Indians, they probably didn't get here previous to 14,000. But there are other people who say, hey, they were here at 28,000 or 30,000. But that's the archaeologist's problem, not mine.
Well, I don't know if we should I let you go? Or?
Whatever you want to do.
We'll stop for now, and then if I think